He says, you probably get asked a lot about getting ungated. Not sure if this would be a good YouTube video for a Q&A like you've been doing, or if it's better over email. Either way, I seriously appreciate everything you teach and how helpful you've been these past 4 months. So great idea, first and foremost, of pointing out that this will be a good question, because obviously I get great questions all the time that I could turn into videos, but I'm not always constantly thinking when I'm responding to emails or responding to YouTube comments like, hey, this would be a perfect one for a question. So appreciate you pointing that out, and that's exactly why I'm doing it and turning it into a Q&A video like today. So thanks, Bryan. So he said he recently purchased a liquidation pallet from one of the websites that I talked about in my YouTube videos. He used bulk.com specifically, and he received a very good pallet. Many thanks for this site, but he has a question about getting ungated. So he's fully aware that sending an invoice is the best way to get ungated, since most big companies, obviously if you're dealing with like a top brand, are going to be, a little bit, they're gonna have trepidation about giving an authorization letter to a third-party seller or a smaller seller like you and me, right? Even if you're moving, a lot of products a month, big companies, so top companies, are going to have a lot of trepidation about getting ungated, right? So he's basically saying he understands that one of the best ways is to, basically order it from a reputable manufacturer or a reputable supplier, and then use that invoice of 10 plus quantity to get ungated. So he says as far as his knowledge goes, he heard that route is very hard, and he's talking about specifically getting an authorized letter from the manufacturer, which I would completely agree with. It's not impossible, it's just very, very difficult if you're dealing with a top brand, right? Getting an invoice from a reputable manufacturer or supplier, whether it's wholesale or some liquidation companies like we're gonna talk about here in a second, is definitely an easier route. I agree with that. So he says his first question is if bulk is considered as a viable source for an invoice to provide to Amazon or not. So can you actually order from bulk? We're gonna answer this in a number of different ways. And can you order from liquidation companies and then use that invoice to get ungated on Amazon, right? He said he bought a pallet that was brand new products, many of which came in 10 plus quantity, like we just touched on, right? You need to order a brand or a product in 10 of that quantity or more in order to use that, and it has to be a reputable manufacturer, in order to use that invoice to get ungated on Amazon, okay? So he says he did order, many of those came in 10 plus quantity of items, which is the requirement for the invoice that is accepted by Amazon, right? He also said he has a second question, if it's not a viable option, so if bulk isn't a viable place, or if liquidation companies aren't a viable place, how would he go about getting ungated for the bigger brands such as OtterBox, Philips, Nike, Adidas, etc. as examples? He said he's been able to get ungated in a lot of the popular toy brands through the invoice method using EE Distribution, which is a wholesale supplier of a lot of the top brands of toys. So that's good. It looks like you're having success there. He says, however, do you know of any distributors like EE Distribution, but for electronic products, shoes, clothing, etc.? So this past month, he was doing a lot of retail arbitrage, and one of the things that I talk about, especially in my Online Arbitrage Pro course, shameless plug, first link in the description, is basically reverse engineering. So you can obviously source through wholesale suppliers, which works very, very well. That's actually one of the modules in the course. You can source through wholesale suppliers and then use those to get ungated. One of the other methods that I talk about in that actual course is basically reverse engineering it, right? So like exactly what he's saying, right? Going out to retail stores and then figuring out what products and brands have awesome deals, and then reverse engineering it and be like, okay, this is a Barbie, right? Barbie's made by Mattel, so I need to get ungated by Mattel. So I go back to EE Distribution, I find the cheapest form of Mattel that I can buy in 10 plus quantity, I order that, I send that invoice into Amazon with those products, and then I'm ungated for Mattel, right? It doesn't matter if I lose a little bit of money on those products, although obviously ideally you'd want to make money on those products, because then I'm ungated for Mattel and Barbie products in the future, and I can go back to the retail stores and buy up all those, ship them into Amazon, and now I'm ungated, right? So I'm gonna make a ridiculous profit margin, and I can do that at every other retail store in the future for that brand or for that toy or whatever, right? So that's one of the ways that I recommend doing it. It's very, very, profitable, especially during like Black Friday, for example, when there's a lot of sales, or even more so during Christmas or right before the holidays. freaking goldmine doing it that way. So he said that he's been able to do that, you know, sourcing invoices for EE distribution to get Ungated with toys, but recently he's been trying to like do the reverse engineering with retail arbitrage, because he's found a lot of profitable items, but he wanted to get Ungated with a lot of the big brands, and he wanted to try to sell some of those items through Amazon, but for now, he's just been using Mercari, Poshmark, and he doesn't say eBay, but Mercari and Poshmark because he's ungated. So he's basically asking, is there something that he can do, or does it, you know, to basically order from those sites or from other reputable manufacturers to get ungated? Or is it something that's just, you know, going to take time to improve his seller metrics? And is there a legitimate way to source from those bigger brands? So a lot of great, he actually then obviously goes on to say, sorry for the long message, but he looks forward to, you know, seeing if I'm going to answer it in video format, which obviously I am, because it was a great question. So a lot of, you know, a little mini questions in there. So I'm going to break it down instead of literally going back and answering it all slowly. I'm just going to read what I wrote because I kind of nailed it, you know, in a lot of different ways in my response. So it jumps around a little bit, but I'm just going to read it to you guys because I think it kind of outlines the main response points that I want to hit home for those of you that are watching. Obviously, I've already responded to him, so he's gotten this answer already, but for those of you that are unsure, you know, how to go about this for yourselves, this will really help you. For those of you that have searched for this, obviously, this will really help you as well. So bulk, unfortunately, does not qualify as a viable supplier to get you ungated on Amazon, okay? Most liquidation companies won't, unfortunately, but actually for some reason, Amazon does accept the invoices from 888 Lots specifically, which is a liquidation company that I recommend in a lot of videos and a lot of my tutorials, okay? So I'm not sure if it's because they give itemized invoices, which they don't actually give them out publicly to most people. You actually have to request the itemized invoice that shows, hey, this is the corresponding ASIN, this is the corresponding product and name, and this is the corresponding quantity that you actually purchased. So I'm not sure specifically, to be perfectly honest, if it's just an 888 Lots thing that they accept, or more specifically, I would venture to assume that if you're sourcing from a liquidation company, and most of them don't do this, that's why most of them aren't reputable manufacturers. Example would be Bulk, right? If you're sourcing from a liquidation company that actually is a reputable, you know, company and actually has like a retail store or like a physical location that they're actually shipping their items out, and you can prove that obviously, and it's a reputable, you know, company that's doing this, and they can prove their own sourcing chain, a lot like 888 Lots, and on top of that, they have itemized invoices with the corresponding ASINs that you're sourcing those products, then that liquidation company might allow you to get ungated with their invoices with Amazon, right? So most liquidation companies, a great example like we're talking about Bulk, are not going to give you itemized invoices. So in that case, using that invoice for that product that doesn't show the ASIN or doesn't show the actual product name that corresponds with the listing that you're actually listing on Amazon for, wouldn't actually be a reputable manufacturer, and Amazon won't accept that because it's too many guessing games, right? They're just assuming that, hey, you source this product and you're guessing on the listing instead of here's the actual invoice, here's the product identifier, which is the ASIN, and you're on that actual ASIN in that listing, which, you know, they obviously would accept you for. So that's first and foremost. Bulk does not qualify. Most liquidation companies won't qualify. A lot of wholesale companies obviously will, because they'll give you those product identifiers. But I'm not sure if it's just 888 Lots that if you get the itemized invoice that's going to get you accepted, or if it's liquidation companies in general, if they have the itemized invoices and the product identifiers that will get you accepted. I just personally have experience with 888 Lots myself, okay? So I would say just to be safe, just order from wholesale and then you'll be sure, okay? If you're trying to get ungated, obviously. So you would still need a quantity of 10 plus units of that brand and unit, whether you're sourcing from 888 Lots to get ungated or from wholesale to get ungated. You still need 10 plus quantity of that actually, of that unit or brand, and then you need to send that invoice in to get ungated for that, okay? Now, in most cases, I do obviously reiterate here that you do need to order from a wholesale supplier of that brand to get ungated. Again, 10 plus quantity of that product slash brand. As a reminder, okay? So I also outlined really briefly that there's really only 3 main ways to get ungated. First and foremost is maximum approval. So in short, maximum approval is basically just selling a lot of units in a short time frame, so your seller metrics improve drastically and you get auto ungated for certain brands when you apply. So maximum approval, nobody really knows what it is. And I've been talking about this for a while. I'm actually close to it. I'm not there yet. I'm still trying to hit that. Sometimes I go away on vacation and, my product sales kind of tank for a week or two, and that actually hurts me. So maximum, I've been trying to do this for a while with books, not just textbooks, but like free and cheap books that I get off like Craigslist, for example. If you're interested in how to actually go about doing this the easiest and the cheapest way, check out my books playlist and my book reselling playlist. I talk about it a lot in there. I'll drop that card up in the right-hand corner right now, and I'll also try to remember to link it down in the description below. A lot of those videos in that playlist talk about maximum approval, or some of them do, and it will give you, viable, actual, tangible ways that you can go about trying to get that yourself the cheapest and the quickest, okay? So maximum approval is believed to be selling 2,000 units in a 6-month period, which roughly equates to about 11 plus units a day, 12 to be safe, for a consistent 6-month period, okay? And obviously without any major issues, right? So like any bad ratings or any A to Z claims or anything like that for the most part. So you need to keep your seller metrics up, and you need to sell roughly 2,000 units in a 6-month period. By doing this, you're basically showing Amazon that you have the ability to sell top brands and high quality items with customer satisfaction, okay? The second way is to order from, like we're talking about here, is to order from an accepted manufacturer or supplier of that brand in 10 plus quantity units, okay? So this is the most common way, obviously, although to get ungated for top brands like Nike, Adidas, etc., you would actually need to identify who a top supplier of that brand is and then order from them and use that invoice to get ungated, okay? I personally don't know of any of these myself, and chances are that most people don't. And anybody that, does know is not going to tell you or me who their manufacturer is and who their supplier is of that brand that's getting them ungated, okay? Because they're not going to want any competition on that. They have a monopoly on the market and they have great margins on it. So they're not going to, create competition on that product and drive their margins down and create competition on that brand to other sellers, excuse me, to drive that product down and that brand down. Little breather there, get a little sip. But that's basically the second way, okay? The third way is to simply get an authorization letter, and like you've already alluded to, this is probably the most hard for, unless you're dealing with like a top brand, then you, especially like Nike, for example, you need the actual brick and mortar store. That's why companies like, Foot Locker or Finish Line have deals with them set up where they can actually sell those, because they do have those brick and mortar stores, okay? But chances are, me and you, even if like you set up like a warehouse or something like that, you won't be able to get an authorization letter from Nike to sell those brand name products, okay, on Amazon, okay? So the third way, like we said, is to get an authorization letter from a brand authorizing you to sell their products on Amazon. And to get this, you'd most likely need a larger retail store and an agreement with that brand, okay? In my experience, and what I've been led to believe by other people that I network with as well that sell a lot more than me, it's extremely rare and probably out of reach for 99.9% of people and normal sellers like you and me, okay? Even if you're selling a lot, it does not matter, okay? They want specific agreements set up with specific companies and specific sellers. Even if you've proven that you're selling well and you have great metrics, it's going to be very, very difficult to get an agreement from a top brand like Nike, for example, right? Adidas is a little bit easier, but still very, very rare, okay? Now, if you do, for example, because you can go on YouTube and you can see a lot of different people that are selling these things and it looks like it's easy. In my experience, if you see someone selling this type of brand or this type of inventory, then chances are they got grandfathered in, which basically means that they were selling that brand before Amazon put a restriction on it. Maybe I think it was 8 to 10 years ago now, maybe a little bit less than that. It might have been 5 or 6. But at a certain time period in the past, Amazon put that restriction on it. I don't know if they actually set that up specifically with a brand like Nike, but there was a time period, let's say 5 to 8 years ago roughly, where Amazon put a restriction on selling top brands like that. And the people that got grandfathered in were already selling those products and those brands and selling them well. So obviously they got grandfathered in, that's what that means, and now they're still able to sell it because when Amazon put the restrictions in place, they didn't restrict the accounts that were selling them and selling them well currently, right? So for people like you and me that haven't been selling them for 6 years, obviously now it's practically, it's very, very rare, okay? Or they purchased an account that was already ungated for it or grandfathered in or had an agreement set up, and they bought, that business, right? Or they purchased that account. Now, you're not technically allowed to purchase an Amazon seller account, but if you purchase a business, little workaround or caveat, if you purchase a business that owns that seller account, that is a legal workaround that's within the Amazon terms of service. So they did one of those two things, either that they got grandfathered in, or they purchased a business that owned that seller account, or they even purchased a seller account, against terms of service or whatever. So they either did one of those two things, or they did one of the other three things above, which we talked about, which is maximum approval, ordering 10 plus quantity from a reputable manufacturer that you know of, or getting an authorization letter and an agreement from that seller, okay? But all in all, the best approach, guys, is to simply just focus on slowly building up your seller metrics by selling as many units as possible and getting good feedback over time. Then you'll slowly get auto-ungated for more and more top brands, which basically just means that when you go to actually request approval for that brand, you won't need to send in an invoice. Amazon will just automatically ungate you. That's auto-ungated because your seller metrics prove that you have a history of servicing Amazon customers very, very well, okay? Now, one of the things that I did say, check out the book playlist, because one of the easiest ways and the quickest ways and the cheapest ways to do this is to sell a lot of very, very cheap books quickly, okay? Because they'll move fast. A lot of them have high sales velocities. They're very, very cheap to fulfill and store in FBA, whether you want to ship them FBM or you want to ship them FBA. It's one of the easiest and quickest ways to do it, okay? Now, you can also slowly source from top manufacturers and suppliers. A lot of other things that sell very, very quickly are like wholesale products, although you're gonna need a lot more money to sell a lot of, 6,000 wholesale products in a 6 month, or 2,000, wholesale products in a 6 month period. You might need, tens of thousands of dollars to invest into that, obviously with your cash flow being tied up a little bit over time, not necessarily from the beginning, but eventually, right? Whereas you might only need a couple grand to do it with books. So it's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper, and in my experience, it's a lot faster, in my opinion. So that's really the best ways to do it.